My name is James Miller, and for over a century, the Miller family has worked this soil. I still remember walking these fields as a child, my grandfather pointing out where each crop would grow best, teaching me the secrets of the land that had sustained our family for generations. The two-story farmhouse with its wraparound porch had weathered countless storms, just as our family had. The red barn, though needing a fresh coat of paint, stood sturdy and proud against the changing landscape. 3 months ago, I buried my grandfather beneath the old oak tree where 5 generations of Millers rested. He was the last of his generation, leaving me alone to continue our family legacy. The farm passed to me, 120 acres of working fields, pastures for my livestock, and the complicated responsibility of maintaining a piece of living history in a world that increasingly valued convenience over character. I never considered myself a farmer by trade. I had gone to college, worked in the city for a few years, but the land called me back. There was something about watching seeds transform into food, caring for animals that depended on you, that gave meaning no office job could match. I returned 6 years ago to help my aging grandfather, and now the farm was solely in my hands. The changes around our property had been gradual at first. A few houses appeared on the old Johnson property that bordered our eastern fields. Then more construction. Within 2 years, a full subdivision had sprouted where corn once grew, Oak Ridge Estates, with its uniform houses, perfect lawns, and residents who looked at my tractor with disdain when I drove past. Your grandfather should have sold when he had the chance, the real estate developer told me at the funeral, handing me his business card before I could even respond. The offer still stands. This area is developing. Progress, you know. I had politely declined, pocketing the card but never intending to call. This land was more than property to me. It held memories, purpose, and a promise I had made to my grandfather. The first official contact from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association came just 3 weeks after the funeral. A letter, printed on expensive stationery, expressed concerns regarding the visual impact of agricultural equipment visible from Oak Ridge Drive. They requested I move my tractor and harvester to less visible locations, and suggested I might consider more decorative fencing to obscure working areas of the property. I read the letter twice, then placed it on my grandfather's old desk with a laugh. Clearly, they did not understand that farms had existed long before homeowners' associations. Their rules could not possibly apply to my property, which predated their development by nearly a century. I decided to ignore it, focusing instead on spring planting and the mountain of paperwork that follows a death in the family. It was while organizing my grandfather's study that I found the first hint that something was not as it seemed. A leather-bound ledger had fallen behind his desk, the pages yellow with age. Inside were meticulous records of land purchases dating back to 1897, with survey maps and property descriptions that extended far beyond the boundaries I had always associated with our farm. I struggled to make sense of the precise handwriting and legal descriptions, but one thing became increasingly clear. The Miller family holdings appeared to be substantially larger than I had been led to believe. The letters from the HOA arrived with increasing frequency over the next few weeks, each one more demanding than the last, citing violations of rules I had never agreed to follow. The language grew progressively threatening, with mentions of fines and potential legal action if I failed to comply with their demands. The latest notice, delivered by a courier who seemed embarrassed by his task, demanded I remove the unsightly grain silo that had stood on our property for over 50 years. I decided it was time to address this situation directly. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening at the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, a building that now sat on land I was beginning to suspect had once belonged to my family. I dressed in my cleanest jeans and button-down shirt, a compromise between respecting their formality and staying true to who I was. The community center gleamed with newness, all glass and polished wood. Inside, rows of residents sat in perfect chairs, turning to stare as I entered. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to undisguised contempt. I took an empty seat in the back row, feeling distinctly out of place among their pressed clothes and salon haircuts. At precisely 7 o'clock, a woman approached the podium. Corinne Williams, according to the nameplate in front of her, had the polished appearance of someone who considered perfection a moral obligation. Her blonde hair was styled into a precise bob, not a strand out of place. Her smile, practiced and cold, never reached her eyes as she called the meeting to order. "Before we begin our regular agenda, I see we have a visitor," she announced, gesturing toward me without actually looking in my direction. "The owner of the agricultural property to our east. Perhaps you would like to introduce yourself." I stood, suddenly aware of every eye in the room fixed on me. "My name is James Miller. My family has owned and operated Miller Farm for 126 years. I am here because I have received several notices from your association that do not apply to my property." Corinne's smile tightened. "Mr. Miller, while your property may predate our community, we all have a responsibility to maintain certain standards. Your farm is the first thing people see when approaching our neighborhood, and frankly, it creates an impression that reduces all of our property values." "My farm is my livelihood, not your scenery," I responded, maintaining a calm I did not entirely feel. "It is a working farm that has been here for generations. More importantly, it is not part of your HOA jurisdiction." A man in an expensive suit stood up. "I paid nearly 7 figures for my home, Miller. I did not invest that kind of money to look at rusted equipment and livestock every day. Either clean it up or sell to someone who will develop it properly." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Corinne nodded approvingly at the man before turning back to me. "The county has development plans, Mr. Miller. Oak Ridge Estates is just phase 1. Progress is inevitable. We can make this process easy or difficult, but make no mistake, this area will be brought into compliance with community standards." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between us. I looked around the room, seeing no allies among the sea of hostile faces. "My property is not subject to your rules. I am not a member of your association. Please stop sending me notices." I left the meeting with their stares burning into my back, but the confrontation had only just begun. The following morning, I found my mailbox filled with formal violation notices, each citing county ordinances rather than HOA rules, a strategic shift in their approach. That afternoon, my old friend Thomas Parker stopped by. Thomas had lived in the area his entire life, working as a clerk at the county records office for over 30 years before retiring. "Be careful with Corinne Williams, James," he warned as we sat on my porch. "Her husband is Deputy Commissioner Robert Williams. They have plans for this entire area, and your farm is the last holdout. The subdivision was just the beginning." "They cannot force me to sell," I insisted. Thomas looked troubled. "There are ways to make owning land impossible, son. Rezoning, access restrictions, drainage issues that mysteriously appear. I have seen it happen before." His warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us expected. The very next day, disaster struck. A section of fencing that had never given me trouble suddenly collapsed, allowing several of my sheep to wander through the opening. By the time I discovered the breach, the animals had made their way into Oak Ridge Estates, attracted by the meticulously maintained community gardens. I rushed to collect them, only to find Corinne Williams and a group of residents already there, taking photos and videos of the sheep calmly grazing on their decorative kale plants. "This is destruction of private property," Corinne declared loudly for the benefit of her recording smartphone. "This is what we have been dealing with, people. Uncontrolled animals, health hazards, property damage." "The fence was secure yesterday," I explained, trying to herd my sheep back toward my property. "This has never happened before." "Save it for the judge," Corinne snapped. "You will be receiving bills for the damage, and I am filing a formal complaint with Animal Control and the County Health Department. This farm of yours is clearly a public nuisance." As I led my sheep home, I noticed fresh cut marks on the fallen section of fence. The break had not been accidental. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my property to create this very situation. Looking back at the development, I caught sight of Corinne on her phone, watching me with a satisfied smile that chilled me to the core. The roar of diesel engines pulled me from sleep at exactly 5:43 a.m. I rushed outside in my pajamas and work boots to find three massive yellow bulldozers positioning themselves across my driveway, the only access road connecting my farm to the county highway. Behind them stood Corinne Williams, clipboard in hand, speaking with a man in a hard hat and safety vest. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice still rough with sleep. "You cannot block my driveway." The construction foreman turned to me, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Sorry, sir. We have county permits to begin preparation work for road widening and drainage improvements. This access point is being temporarily closed." "Temporarily," I echoed in disbelief. "I have livestock that need feed delivered today. I have milk that needs to go to market." Corinne stepped forward, her expression a mask of false concern. "The county has determined this access point poses safety and environmental risks, Mr. Miller. The paperwork is all in order." She held out a document bearing the county seal. "Alternative arrangements should have been made. You were notified." I had received no such notification. The paper in her hand indicated the closure could last up to 30 days pending completion of survey work. My heart raced as I considered the implications. Without access to the road, I could not bring in supplies or move products out. My animals would suffer. My business would collapse. "This is illegal," I insisted. "You cannot cut off access to my property without proper notice or alternative access." "Take it up with the county," Corinne replied coolly. "Commissioner Williams signed off on this personally. Now, if you will excuse us, we have work to continue." I spent the next 4 hours on the phone, bouncing between county departments like a pinball. Each call ended the same way, apologetic voices claiming no authority to intervene, redirecting me to another office that would inevitably do the same. When I finally reached the sheriff's department, the deputy expressed sympathy but explained that with proper permits in place, there was nothing he could do. "It is private property matter complicated by county infrastructure work," he explained. "You need to file an emergency injunction with the court." By noon, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. Inside the barn, my dairy cows grew restless, needing to be milked. The feed supplies would last 3 days at most. Without the ability to transport milk to the processing facility, I would be forced to dump it, losing critical income I could not afford to lose. I stood at the edge of my property, watching workers set up temporary barriers behind the bulldozers. Corinne's car had long since departed, but the damage was done. The message was clear: surrender the farm or watch it die a slow death from isolation. As evening approached, the rumble of an old truck engine caught my attention, not from the blocked driveway, but from the far western edge of my property. Headlights bounced across the rutted field as a vehicle approached along an almost forgotten farm track. It was Bill Cooper, my 83-year-old neighbor whose family had farmed adjoining land until selling to developers a decade ago. "Thought you might need some supplies," the old man called as he climbed stiffly from his truck. The bed was loaded with hay bales and feed sacks. "My grandson works at the farm supply store. He told me what was happening." "How did you know about this back entrance?" I asked, helping him unload. Bill chuckled. "Boy, this track connected our farm since before your grandfather was born. They may control the roads, but they do not know the land. Not like we do." As we worked, Bill confirmed what I had suspected. Corinne Williams and her husband have been planning this takeover for years. They want to build something called Grand Oak Ridge. Shopping centers, condos, golf course. Your farm is the only thing standing in their way. "Why not just offer to buy me out?" I asked. "Because you might say no," Bill replied simply, "or ask for what the land is actually worth. Cheaper to force you into bankruptcy and pick it up for pennies at auction." He paused, looking at me seriously. "Robert Williams has been county commissioner for 15 years. Nothing happens here without his approval." That night after Bill left, I sat at my grandfather's desk surrounded by the mysterious ledgers and maps I had discovered. There had to be answers here, some way to fight back against the forces aligning against me. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my animals, for my family legacy, and for the right to exist in a changing world that seemed determined to erase every trace of its rural roots. With the blockade entering its third day, desperation drove me deeper into my grandfather's records. Sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford as I pored over faded documents by lamplight. Bill Cooper continued his nighttime supply runs, but we both knew it was a temporary solution at best. My dairy operation was already suffering, with gallons of milk having to be discarded daily. The breakthrough came at 2:14 a.m., as I was cross-referencing a particularly old deed with a yellowed survey map. My fingers traced boundary lines that extended far beyond what I had always believed was Miller property. According to these documents, my family's original land holdings encompassed over 2,800 acres, nearly a quarter of the county's most developed areas, including the entirety of what was now Oak Ridge Estates. More startling was a leather portfolio containing lease agreements dated 1973. My grandfather had not sold the eastern parcels as I had always believed. He had leased them to Westwood Development Corporation for a period of 50 years, with specific conditions regarding land use and renewal options. According to the documents, those leases had expired 3 years earlier. My hands trembled as I realized the implications. If these documents were authentic and legally binding, the entire Oak Ridge Estates development, all 96 homes, the community center, the decorative parks, sat on land that still legally belonged to the Miller family. Dawn found me waiting outside the office of Patricia Hernandez, one of the oldest law practices in the county. Patricia herself was nearing retirement, her hair now silver, but her reputation for sharp legal expertise remained undiminished. More importantly, according to my grandfather's records, she had been present when the original lease agreements were signed. "James Miller," she said, looking up from the documents spread across her desk. "I wondered when you might find these." "You knew?" I asked, surprise evident in my voice. She removed her reading glasses with a sigh. "Your grandfather was a private man. He instructed me to wait until you came asking. I had begun to think you never would." Patricia confirmed what the documents suggested. My family had never sold the bulk of their land holdings. Instead, My grandfather had entered into strategic long-term leases that allowed for development while maintaining ultimate ownership. The 50-year lease to Westwood expired 3 years ago, she explained. They were required to negotiate renewal 6 months before expiration. They never did. How is that possible? I asked. Surely someone would have noticed. Patricia's expression hardened. Robert Williams happened. When he became commissioner, county record-keeping became remarkably selective. Files disappeared. Records were misfiled. The digital transition was conveniently incomplete. She pulled out a tablet accessing county property records. Look here. The current records show these parcels were sold, not leased, but I have the original documents, notarized and filed with the state property office. Your grandfather was careful. He kept copies outside the county system. So the HOA development is sitting on your land, she confirmed. Not just the homes, but the shopping center they are planning, the new county offices, all of it. The Miller property extends far beyond what you have been farming. Back at her computer, Patricia showed me satellite images overlaid with the true property boundaries. My inheritance was not just a farm. It was an empire of prime real estate that developers and county officials had been quietly stealing through deliberate bureaucratic manipulation. Why would my grandfather let this happen? I wondered aloud. Malcolm Miller played the long game, Patricia explained. He knew development was inevitable. Rather than fight it, he structured agreements that would ultimately benefit his heirs. The leases generated income that he reinvested. Your grandfather was not just a farmer, James. He was a shrewd businessman who understood land was the one thing they are not making more of. As morning turned to afternoon, Patricia made calls to verify the status of the original documents with the state registry. With each confirmation, my position strengthened. The legal reality was clear. I owned the land beneath Oak Ridge Estates and much more. The residents there had purchased homes built on leased land that was now controlled by me. What about the homeowners? I asked. They bought in good faith. Patricia nodded approvingly. That shows character, considering what they have put you through. The homeowners are victims too. They were never told they were buying structures on leased land. They own their homes but not the ground beneath them. That fraud falls on the developers and the county officials who covered it up. As I prepared to leave her office, Patricia held my arm. Be careful, James. Robert and Corinne Williams have built their reputation and fortune on development deals. When you challenge this, you are not just fighting an HOA, you are exposing years of corruption at the highest levels of county government. I drove home along back roads to avoid the blockade, my mind reeling with possibilities. For the first time since the bulldozers arrived, I felt something beyond anger and fear. I felt hope, and the beginnings of a plan that would change everything. The next 3 weeks transformed me from farmer to investigator. With Patricia's guidance, I proceeded carefully, building a case that no amount of political connection could dismiss. I needed irrefutable evidence of both my ownership and the corruption that had nearly stolen my birthright. My first target was the county records office. Armed with a small digital recorder hidden in my pocket, I presented myself as a confused landowner trying to understand property boundaries. The clerk, assuming I knew nothing, explained the system while inadvertently confirming critical facts. These transition parcels are complicated, she said, pointing to areas that included my property and the development. The old lease agreements were supposed to be converted to sales during the digital update, but some paperwork was misplaced. Misplaced? I asked innocently. She lowered her voice. Between us, Commissioner Williams made it clear certain records were priority and others could wait. Your grandfather's files were always at the bottom of the pile. Strange coincidence, right? Next came building permits and environmental surveys. Through careful requests that appeared routine, I assembled documentation showing the Oak Ridge development had bypassed required environmental impact studies for wetland protection. The drainage systems they installed had diverted natural water flow, causing erosion on my eastern fields. Damage I had attributed to bad weather rather than deliberate manipulation. From a former county engineer who had retired after clashing with Commissioner Williams, I obtained original watershed maps showing how the development had encroached on protected areas. They buried my reports, he told me. When I pushed back, they pushed me out. Patricia connected me with other farmers and landowners who had experienced similar pressure tactics. In coffee shops and farm kitchens, I recorded their stories: property mysteriously rezoned, water access restricted, sudden road closures that made agricultural operations impossible. Each case followed the same pattern, with land eventually purchased by shell companies connected to the Williams family. The environmental angle proved particularly valuable. Water samples from streams crossing my property revealed contaminants traced directly to inadequate drainage systems at Oak Ridge Estates. The environmental protection groups I contacted were eager to help, providing testing and documentation that strengthened my position. Sandra Chen from the Historical Preservation Society became an unexpected ally. Your farm qualifies for historical protection status, she explained during a visit. The main house and barn date back to 1897. They cannot be demolished without extensive review. We have been trying to contact you for years, but our letters were apparently never delivered. More disturbing was what Thomas Parker discovered in files he still had access to through former colleagues. The recently approved plans for Grand Oak Ridge included a luxury golf resort precisely where my farmhouse stood. The projected completion date predated the blockade by months. They had planned my removal long before the bulldozers arrived. But the most damning evidence came from an unlikely source. Corinne Williams' assistant, increasingly uncomfortable with her boss's methods, provided copies of emails discussing the Miller problem and strategies to accelerate acquisition through hardship. One email from Commissioner Williams explicitly mentioned using county resources to apply maximum pressure until farm operations become untenable. While gathering evidence, I maintained the appearance of a struggling farmer nearing defeat. The bulldozers remained in place, though Bill Cooper's nighttime supply runs kept my animals fed. Corinne Williams drove by regularly, clearly monitoring the situation and expecting my surrender at any moment. What she did not see was the activity inside my home, where Patricia and I prepared formal legal notices asserting my ownership rights over all the leased properties. We drafted court filings documenting the pattern of corruption and fraud. Most importantly, we scheduled a special county meeting where land use issues could be publicly addressed, a forum where sunshine laws required full transparency and public record. The night before the meeting, I stood on my porch watching Corinne Williams give an interview to the local news station at the edge of my property. "This abandoned farm represents the past," she declared, gesturing toward my home and fields. "Grand Oak Ridge represents our future, economic growth, luxury amenities, and increased tax revenue." Little did she know that while she spoke, county clerks were processing paperwork that would turn her carefully constructed kingdom to dust. The storm I had been quietly assembling was about to break, and not even the Williams family would be able to control the damage. The county meeting hall had never seen such attendance. Word had spread about a special session addressing land use irregularities, drawing curious residents, reporters from local news outlets, and nearly every homeowner from Oak Ridge Estates. I arrived early with Patricia, settling into seats near the back to observe the room filling with people whose lives were about to change dramatically. Commissioner Robert Williams presided from the raised dais, his expression a practiced mask of civic authority. Beside him sat Corinne, whispering occasionally in his ear while surveying the crowd. Neither acknowledged my presence, though I felt Corinne's gaze pass over me with dismissive confidence. Today's special session addresses ongoing development and infrastructure priorities, Commissioner Williams began, his voice amplified through the sound system. Before we open for public comment, Mrs. Williams has updates regarding the Oak Ridge community expansion. Corinne approached the podium with the smooth assurance of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. As Homeowners Association President and Community Liaison, I am pleased to announce that Phase 2 of our development has received preliminary approval. Grand Oak Ridge will transform underutilized agricultural land into a premier residential and commercial district, generating significant tax revenue and creating hundreds of jobs. Slides appeared on the large screen behind her, showing architectural renderings of luxury homes and a golf course where my farm currently stood. The audience murmured appreciatively at images of fountains and tree-lined boulevards. We anticipate breaking ground within 60 days, Corinne continued. The final obstacles to progress are being addressed through appropriate county channels. At Patricia's nod, I stood and moved toward the central aisle. I would like to address these obstacles directly, I called out clearly. Commissioner Williams frowned. Public comment will be permitted after the presentation, Mr. Miller. This cannot wait, I replied, continuing my walk toward the front. Patricia followed, carrying a leather briefcase. This entire meeting is predicated on fraudulent information. Corinne's composed facade cracked slightly. Commissioner, please instruct Mr. Miller to wait his turn or be removed. Actually, Patricia interjected, placing her Bar Association credentials on the document table, my client has urgent information directly relevant to the matter at hand. Under County Sunshine Ordinance 47B, citizens may interrupt proceedings to present evidence of procedural irregularities. The legal citation clearly caught the commissioner off guard. After a moment of visible internal debate, he nodded reluctantly. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Miller. I approached the podium as Patricia connected her laptop to the projection system. The screen behind me changed from architectural renderings to a century-old land survey map. My name is James Miller, I began, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. For 126 years, my family has owned and operated Miller Farm. But what most people in this room do not know, what was deliberately kept from you, is that Miller holdings extend far beyond the active farmland. The image changed to a modern satellite view with property boundaries highlighted in red. Gasps rippled through the audience as the true extent of my family's ownership became clear. Boundaries encompassing Oak Ridge Estates and much of the surrounding area planned for development. In 1973, my grandfather leased portions of our land to Westwood Development Corporation for a period of 50 years. He did not sell the land, he leased it, with specific conditions and renewal requirements. I held up the original documents. These leases expired 3 years ago without proper renewal, meaning the land reverted to Miller family ownership. Corinne rushed toward the podium. This is absurd. Those properties were purchased outright. The county records clearly show. The county records were altered, I interrupted, nodding to Patricia, who displayed scanned documents with highlighted discrepancies. Original documents filed with the State Land Office confirm these were leases, not sales. My attorney has verified their authenticity and legal standing. Commissioner Williams banged his gavel. These allegations are serious and require proper legal review before public discussion. I move to table this matter pending. Before you attempt to bury this again, Patricia interjected, you should know that complete copies of all documents have been filed with the State Attorney General's office, along with evidence of systematic records manipulation within county offices. The room erupted in confused conversation. Homeowners from Oak Ridge Estates looked particularly distressed, turning to one another with expressions of disbelief and growing anger. "What does this mean for our homes?" someone shouted from the audience. "It means," I explained, turning to address the room directly, "that you purchased houses built on land that the developers did not actually own. You own your structures, but the land beneath them legally belongs to the Miller Family Trust." The chaos increased until Commissioner Williams banged his gavel repeatedly. When order was finally restored, Karen approached the microphone, her composure visibly strained. "These are clearly forged documents," she declared. "Mr. Miller is a desperate farmer trying to extract money through frivolous claims. The county has confirmed." "The county has been complicit in fraud," I stated firmly, nodding to Patricia, who played the first audio recording. Karen's voice filled the room. "The Miller property is the final piece. Robert assures me zoning changes will force compliance within 6 months. The bulldozer strategy should accelerate the timeline." As the recording continued, detailing deliberate plans to block my driveway and force my animals into the subdivision, Commissioner Williams' face drained of color. Karen lunged for the computer, but sheriff's deputies, present as standard security for all county meetings, moved to block her. For the next 20 minutes, we presented irrefutable evidence of corruption, altered records, environmental violations, deliberate harassment, and misuse of county resources for personal gain. With each revelation, the mood in the room shifted palpably. Longtime residents who had witnessed similar tactics recognized the pattern. Homeowners from Oak Ridge Estates realized they had been deceived about their property rights. As legal owner of the land beneath Oak Ridge Estates, I continued once the evidence had been presented, I could technically demand immediate vacancy. However, I recognized that homeowners purchased in good faith, unaware of the fraud being perpetrated. I revealed my proposed solution: fair and reasonable long-term land leases offered directly to current homeowners, eliminating the corrupt HOA structure that had served as the Williams power base. The environmental violations would be corrected, and protective covenants would preserve the rural-urban balance that made the area special. Commissioner Williams, seeing his position crumbling, made one last attempt to regain control. "This meeting is adjourned pending legal review. Security, please clear the room." The elderly county clerk who had been recording minutes stood up. "Commissioner, a motion to adjourn requires a majority vote when evidence of malfeasance has been presented. That is County Charter, Article 7. Before Williams could respond, the back doors of the meeting hall opened. 2 men in suits entered, flanked by uniformed state police officers. "Robert Williams, Karen Williams," one announced clearly. "I am Special Agent Donovan with the State Bureau of Investigation. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, corruption, evidence tampering, and misuse of public office." As the Williams were escorted from the room in handcuffs, the The remaining county board members voted unanimously to recognize the legitimacy of my ownership claims pending full legal review. By meeting's end, the first formal orders had been issued: immediate removal of the bulldozers blocking my farm entrance, and suspension of all permits related to the fraudulent Grand Oak Ridge development. I left the meeting hall surrounded by Oak Ridge residents, no longer hostile but anxious about their futures. "What happens to our homes now?" a woman asked, fear evident in her voice. "We will work it out fairly," I promised. This was never about punishing homeowners. It was about stopping corruption and preserving what makes this land special. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun illuminated my farm in golden light. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned decisively. The land that had sustained my family for generations would continue to do so, not just through agriculture, but through a new vision of responsible stewardship that honored both progress and tradition. The bulldozers were gone by sunrise. I stood at my driveway entrance watching county workers remove the barriers that had isolated my farm. One worker approached, cap in hand. "Mr. Miller, I want to apologize. We were just following orders, but that does not make it right." I nodded, understanding the position he had been in. "You have a job to do. I never blame the workers." Over the coming days, county vehicles arrived with a different purpose: delivering official letters of apology, expedited permits for farm improvements I had requested years earlier, and documents formally recognizing the full extent of Miller property holdings. The transformation in how officials treated me was both gratifying and troubling, a stark reminder of how power had been abused. Local news covered the arrests extensively. Beyond the Williams, 3 other county officials faced charges related to the systematic corruption. The state investigation expanded to include the developers who had knowingly built and sold homes on leased land without disclosure to buyers. Each new revelation confirmed what I had suspected: the scheme to seize my farm had been just one part of a much larger pattern of corruption. The most difficult challenge was addressing the homeowners in Oak Ridge estates. Many had invested their life savings in properties that now stood on legally uncertain ground. Within a week of the county meeting, I arranged a community gathering at the farm, neutral territory where we could speak openly. Nearly every homeowner attended, gathering in the same barn that Corinne Williams had once called an eyesore. Their expressions ranged from anger to fear to cautious hope. "I know you are worried," I began, standing on a hay bale to be visible to everyone. "You purchased your homes in good faith. You should not suffer because of others' corruption." I outlined my proposal, converting their situation to legitimate land leases with terms favorable to current homeowners. The annual cost would be reasonable, with guaranteed rates for 20 years before modest adjustments tied to inflation. Most importantly, the leases would be transferable with home sales, providing security for their investments. "Why not just sell us the land outright?" one man asked. "The Miller Land Trust was established with specific provisions," I explained. "My grandfather believed in stewardship rather than ownership. The lease structure allows for use while ensuring long-term protection of the land itself." A woman stepped forward. "I suspect you could evict us all and make much more money with new development." "I could," I acknowledged. "But this community is more valuable than money. My goal is balance, honoring both the agricultural heritage and the reality of modern housing needs. We can coexist if we respect each other." Over the following months, Patricia and I met with families individually, addressing specific concerns and customizing arrangements where needed. Elderly residents received lifetime guaranteed rates. Young families gained options for expanding their properties within environmental guidelines. By summer's end, over 80% of homeowners had signed new agreements, with the remainder in productive negotiations.